Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about an issue which has come up actually a lot since I started this channel, and that addresses an issue about the nature of criticism and its utility for viewers like you, something like that. Anyway, here's the issue. There is such a thing, or is there such a thing, if I want to form it as a question, as a critical consensus about what the best recordings are? And the answer is yes, there is up to a point. And we need to talk about what point we get to, because especially these days, and as it's increasing, as we've been talking about, the internet is a free-for-all. It's the Wild West. Everyone's got opinions. Everyone, including soi-disant critics, offers their opinions. And there's this myth. The myth is that critics live in a vacuum. It's a myth that I've heard enunciated by some viewers and people like that because that's how they live. In other words, they have a recording, they have an opinion about it, and their opinion is as good as any other opinion. Well, no, not all opinions are created equal. One of the things that makes a critic's opinion, I think, valuable or useful to viewers or readers, if it's a written thing, is that idea of consensus. And we tried to approach it in that sequence of videos called Reference Recordings, where I talked about what the critical consensus was for various performances, and you can go have a look at it. It was somewhat controversial, and interestingly so, I think. It really was. But, how do you arrive at a critical consensus? Well, if you're in a profession, you know other people who are in the same profession, theoretically, even one as debased and messed up as music criticism, which is almost, it's on its last gasp in many respects. One of the objects of this whole exercise is to try and reinvigorate the profession by offering opinions that have a certain value. I mean, and that, explain how they're arrived at and what that utility may be. But there are still some really, really fine critics out there. Among them are quite a few that I know. You get to know them in a lot of ways. I got to know them because I edited several magazines. I edited Fanfare magazine. I edited, I'm still editing ClassicsToday.com, which is an online magazine. And so you meet people and you talk to people and you interview people and you have ongoing conversations with people whose opinions you respect. This is the point. You have to find people who have the right fund of knowledge, the right experience to be able to be good critics. But when you talk to good critics, you arrive often is not at a consensus. I have some very, very good friends in the critical profession, including some of whom you've met. My good friend in Munich, Dr. Sören Meyer-Eller, Christoph Huss, who's at Le Devoir in Montreal, who's a very good friend and a very, very good critic. The critics who write for Classics Today, Victor Carr, Jed Disler, Bob Levine, they've taught me an incredible amount. And we are always chatting. We're always chatting about recordings and what we think are the good ones. For a bunch of years, I guess it was nearly a decade, since I founded the Cannes Classical Awards and ran that. We were talking to the editors of all the major music magazines in Europe, basically, and Australia, including Cyrus Mayer-Homji, who's now head of Universal Australia, who's doing the Eloquence editions of boxes, which we talk about all the time. So there are lots of people out there. At one point, when we were doing the awards, the Cannes Classical Awards, we had something like 200 plus critics who were all casting votes, all for the same recordings. We came up with our lists and based on what our critics had done, and we talked about them, and then all the editors got together and boiled it down in an attempt to create an award which had some meaning, which wasn't just, the people who paid off the magazines for advertising or the members of NARIS who give the Grammys but never listen to the things they give the Grammys to. I mean, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of ways in which consensus arises. Some of it you also get just by reading magazines. Reading review magazines, reading other reviews. A lot of you do that. And a lot of you are very interested in seeing if there's consensus. And I know that if I'm an outlier and a bunch of other people have praised something and I say it sucks, I get comments from you saying, well, How do you explain yourself? And that's a perfectly valid and very, I welcome questions like that when there are dissenting opinions or differing opinions, because I think that we have to defend ourselves. We should be able to defend ourselves without rancor. I'm pretty good at rancor, but I mean, generally speaking, I have no problem defending my view of something because it's based on audible facts and people can disagree. And if they disagree, good. That's fine. It's perfectly legitimate. But the point is that critics who operate in the profession are operating within a community in which there's a dialogue. And when we do criticism, we share the results of that dialogue with you all. And hopefully it's meaningful. But of course, you got to know how to pick them. It was Katharine Hepburn was once asked about Peter O'Toole after, they did The Lion in Winter, which was like one of the greatest movies ever. And I just adore it. It has a fabulous soundtrack by John Barry, which we've talked about on this channel. But she said about Peter O'Toole, she said, he didn't know how to pick them. He just did a lot of bad movies. She said, you have to know how to choose what you're doing. And it's the same thing with criticism, because there are a lot of people out there who are dreadful. But, they're like with every profession, you have some people who are really good and some people who are really incompetent. And when that profession involves rendering opinions about things, there are so many things that can lead to total incompetence. So, yeah, you have to be careful who your friends are. But the fact of the matter is that there is more of a consensus out there than you might expect. And, just because we all listen to these things individually and have very personal feelings about them, that doesn't mean that the opinions that we express are completely uninfluenced by other factors. And if you have, I'm just trying to make the point here that if you are operating in a profession, then you have professional standards, and you have levels of quality, and you have ethics, and you have all these different factors that come to play. It's not just, put on a record and then blab about it. That isn't how I operate. Quite often I put on a record, and particularly if I like it. If I don't like it, I don't really care so much, because the things I don't like about it are usually pretty obvious and describable. And people can disagree about whether they think those factors are valid or not as a reason to dislike something. But to like something, to really, really think it's fabulous, that's much harder. It's just like in the world of music itself, how difficult it is to be happy without being facile or without being shallow, to be deeply joyful. That's what great composers were able to do, as opposed to just sort of bland and pleasant. Well, there's a lot of criticism out there that qualifies as bland and pleasant. It just says, this is okay, that's okay. It doesn't come to any firm opinions. And if you really think something is great, then it has to be great as compared to all of the other great things that have been done since time immemorial. And for that, especially today, especially with the record industry the way it is, with so many recordings of basic repertoire, you may not have perfect knowledge of the discography. You may not remember everything you're supposed to remember. You may not have time to make all the comparisons, in actual real-time listening. You may want the opinion of people who have greater expertise than you do. I've heard recordings many times of just piano repertoire that I think is amazing. And I call Jed and say, Jed, did you hear this? So you know what it is? Because I don't want to give an opinion that's not informed. That's not informed by as wide and deep a fund of knowledge and experience as I can bring to bear. And that's very, very, very different from somebody just listening to somebody and going to their little keyboard or thingy and typing on their blog. Oh, it's wonderful. It's fabulous. I loved it. Well, yes, that's okay. That's nice to know. But we need to have more than that if we're going to be professional critics. And so I just wanted to make the point, without belaboring it to excess, that the act of doing criticism involves seeking out a consensus, trying to see if one exists or trying to build one, talking to your colleagues and seeing if they're on the same wavelength that you are. All of those things matter. And all of those things, I think, when used properly and in a professional way, combine to create a body of opinion and a body of advice, which is useful to you all when you are making your listening and purchase decisions. So that's it, my friends. I just want to share that with you because I just think that the profession of criticism needs as much support as it can get. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care.